Hello, my relatives. Welcome. It's so good to see you all. I greet you with a warm heart. Welcome to waјčaļča's Gifts of the Plant Nation webinar series. Mishaila Bowman Sisseton Wahpeton Dakota. Inawa ki Stephanie waļčaļča, Kunshiwa ki Jenny waļčaļča. Bede oto toy ed watik hello everybody, my name is Mishaila. I will be your host for this evening. I come from the waļčaļča out in Sisseton. I used to work for waļčaļča a while back, and now I'm really excited to be here as a volunteer hosting some of our different plant medicine webinars. And this evening, I'm really excited to host or MC our Gifts of the Plant Nation webinar, where we'll be talking about waļčaļča, or milkweed. Another name that we have for it in Dakota is panupada. And just like any family or any language, words are going to be different family to family. So there are just two words that we call milkweed in Dakota. But this evening, we're also going to be joined by our wonderful ASL interpreters. If you're tuning in from Facebook Live, there's a small possibility that you won't be able to see our ASL interpreters. But if you have the Zoom, they should be able to be in view. We've also enabled some live captioning if you need, which you should be able to enable that through the Zoom settings as well. And if for some reason you're not seeing our ASL interpreters on the Zoom or Facebook, just feel free to message us, but also know that after the webinar, we'll have a recording up on YouTube. And that should for sure have our ASL interpreters. So like I said, I'm really excited to be here and MC. Gifts of the Plant Nation is a webinar series that waļčaļča started, I think, about 2 years. And it's a seasonal webinar series where each season of the year, we pick one plant relative to highlight and talk about all of their gifts and cultural stories, harvesting practices, sharing fun and nutritional recipes, and also getting to talk about these plant relatives and their role not only in our cultural stories, but in the environment as well, and their ecological benefits, and how we have so much to learn from our plant relatives. So tonight we will be having 3 presenters. I'm really excited that we're going to have Ella Robertson here, who's Dakota from Sisseton, to talk about milkweed and how to harvest milkweed and the uses of milkweed and what it means to live life in reciprocity with our plant relatives, especially as Dakota communities. And then we'll hear from Jenna Grey Eagle, who is waļčaļča's Environmental Justice Stewardship Programs Manager. And Jenna's going to talk about the nutritional benefits of milkweeds and share some really delicious recipes with us. And then to close out, we're going to have Gabby Menomin join us and talk about all of the ecological roles that milkweed has in our societies, and share some wonderful environmental knowledge and talk a lot about our pollinator relatives. I personally just absolutely adore the way that waļčaļča's Gifts of the Plant Nation webinars are structured, because we get to cover so many wonderful aspects from these plant relatives and their roles in our culture and societies, to how they are not just relatives to us, but to our pollinator relatives and all of the animals and birds around us. So without further ado, just a reminder that with all of our webinars, we have a Q&A portion at the end. So if we're ever going through Ella's piece or Jenna's piece or Gabby's piece, and you really want to know, or you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat in either Zoom or our chat in Facebook Live. And at the end of our webinar, we're going to circle back to those questions and ask those. And then we'll close out with a survey to make sure that we're able to keep bringing wonderful programming like this. And before we get started, I just wanted to take a few minutes to acknowledge that this week, waļčaļča started officially construction on the waļčaļča Center that will be here in Imanijaska or St. Paul. And if you aren't familiar, waļčaļča is a native-led environmental organization here in St. Paul that does wonderful work advocating for Dakota sacred sites, sharing different plant knowledge and plant medicines, taking care of community medicine gardens, and doing a lot of wonderful conservation work and environmental education here in the cities. So this is a wonderful opportunity where we can expand what we do here in the cities to our relatives who are all over. And so I'm just really excited and honored to be here and MC this wonderful event and be in the same virtual room as some of the most wonderful and knowledgeable Native women in STEM and environmental fields, where we can all come together and learn from each other. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Ella.
Good evening, Mitakiapi. I'm so happy to be here. Chante washte na pechuz apie, tate hadinajiwi emakiapie. My English name is Ella Robertson. My Dakota name is Stops the Wind Woman. And I am so thankful and honored that I was asked to come and speak this evening on milkweed. And just the inclusion of such amazing things that waļčaļča is doing, not only within their community, but online, you know, reaching such a larger audience is so amazing. And I really appreciate being involved with your activities. So I'm really grateful for that. So I just wanted to introduce myself and tell a little bit about myself, because I feel that when we share our stories and who we are, where we come from, that we can we become more relatable and we find commonality in each other. And you know, sometimes you know, like myself, I must say it, I didn't grow up being an expert in plants. I grew up on the Lake Traverse Reservation. I'm a member of the Big Huli District, which those that are familiar with our reservation has 7 districts. And I grew up in the country, in which right now I reside in the country with my husband and our 2 children. And I am adjunct faculty at the Sisseton Wahpeton College. Last semester, I had taught traditional plants and herbs, which that's the first time that a tribal member has taught that class. So I was very excited about that. And there's so much content, so much information to share that, you know, it's hard to determine which plants are going to make the cut, right? And which ones are most widely known and which ones aren't so well known. But I want to talk a little bit about you know, my individual journey, just because you know, we have knowledge and events that happen in our lives and we don't understand them right away, and why we go through these different things in our lives. And then as we become older now, you know, this year I turned 50, which is a huge milestone. And I look back and I'm just like, oh my gosh, you know, I never would have thought that you know, my life right now centers around learning every day, you know, trying to learn as much as I can about our traditional uses of plants and different medicines, but also growing my own foods, traditional foods, and realizing how beneficial they are for our bodies. And that, you know, a lot of that knowledge has gone to sleep for, you know, for a lot of people. And I don't like to say that it's lost because it's there. It's just finding individuals that have that knowledge and, you know, respectfully asking them to share what they can. So, like my journey with the milkweed, this was actually one of the very first plants that I was introduced to as a child. And my mother was the one that shared her knowledge with me. And she doesn't like me to say this, but you know, during the time when she was growing up, there was, you know, a struggle on the reservation with, you know, not a lot of jobs, and so a lot of families experienced financial hardships, and so they had to rely on their plant knowledge, the things that were growing wild, the things that were free to eat, in order to feed their families. And so she grew up eating milkweed along with a number of other plants that even right now there's a lot of people that don't consume them. And milkweed was one. We would go out in, you know, June of the year to go harvest, and the part that we harvested was the flower, and that's what I grew up eating. And so, you know, as I became older, I'm thinking back, you know, wow, if my parents hadn't, you know, struggled in that way, they probably wouldn't have retained the information, the knowledge that they did, you know, and then it wouldn't have been passed on to me. And so I am, you know, I suppose, you know, somewhat grateful that information stayed alive in my family. As when I grew up, I didn't really consider myself as being like a Dakota. I went to a public school and there was other natives there, but I didn't know the language. My mother didn't know the language. My grandpa had told her that, you know, there's no place in this world for those things, for the language, and, you know, for the other things that she wanted to know. And so he refused to teach her the language. And so a part of me felt that because that was missing, like I wasn't Dakota, because I didn't have the language, and we didn't hear it spoken. And so I feel like it made me more determined to learn all that I could about the language, about the culture, and specifically about plants and foods. And so I'm really, you know, blessed, I would say, to have that type of drive. That even though I formally wasn't being taught any of these things, I went out and I found people, and I found a lot of information in historical books, that I was able to research all of these things. And being raised in the country, we got to see a lot of these plants. We became familiar with where they grew, what they look like, how to, you know, identify them, and the type of landscape that they grew in, which is really important as well, because you know, you can't just I can walk out my front door and I have milkweeds growing out here because I've allowed them to grow. But a lot of places you have to have a specific type of environment for them to grow in. And so I feel very fortunate that I was able to learn these things, the information that I have about the milkweed, and be able to share it today. And I've been, you know, it took me some time to realize the importance of sharing, and how there's a lot of people that don't have the resources. They don't have elders around them that can share what they know about plants and foods. And so what I know, I try to share. I go into the schools, I go out into the community like this, able to provide information via Zoom and Facebook. I think that is really amazing because, you know, a lot of us, we want to be able to identify with things such as foods that are important for us. So I am going to kind of take a step back. You know, when I'm teaching my classes, a lot of times I talk about, you know, the reservation eras and how a lot of our knowledge was taken away from us. And now, you know, we're in a time in our lives, a time in history where we can freely practice gathering, speaking our language, eating what we want when we want. And at the beginning of my traditional plants and herbs class, I talked about, you know, the reservation era and the ration tickets, and we had examples of ration tickets, and that was, you know, was the start of the decline in our knowledge of our plants and our foods. You know, that our ancestors could, you know, be incarcerated for continuing these practices because there was rations that were provided for them, and this was the food that the government gave you. This was the food that you eat, and you prepare it in the ways, you know, that we showed you. So it's understanding that history that really helps us to appreciate where we are today and the ability that we have to go out there if we want to and learn the information that's being provided today, you know, that it can be widespread and it's ours to take without you know, fear of repercussions. So for me, that's really an exciting thing. And I just want to say that much because I really feel that we need to have a clear appreciation for where we are and the things that our ancestors went through to help keep this knowledge alive for us today, for us to be able to pass this on. So, okay, we can go to the next slide. So oral traditions are key in keeping our traditional knowledge of, you know, what it is to be a Native in, you know, the 21st century, that we're able to practice our life ways. And the more that we practice it, become familiar with it, and show our children and our grandchildren how to live this way of life, that it's going to be here for generations to come. And to me, that's an exciting promise that we can make to the future, you know, peoples of our tribe. Okay, next slide. So, sorry, I have to move my little window here. I think that when we're learning something new, it's always hard to be confident about that knowledge. And the important part of learning about traditional foods is, number one, being able to clearly identify what you're looking for, knowing the type of environment that it grows in, the time of year that it's to be harvested, and all the little details that each plant has, the type of stem that it has, the vein structure of the leaves, where it grows. We need to understand the season that it's to be harvested, the time frame, which, you know, it's all dependent on the weather. Like this year, everything is you know, a few weeks earlier. I missed getting one of my plants this year because it came really early. And so you have to really pay attention to the weather. And so it encouraged us to spend time outdoors, to be more aware of our environment. And I know with those that live in, you know, the city, that it's, you know, might be a little more difficult than those of us that live out in the country. We're just going out, you know, our backyard, or it's just a short drive to to find an area where we can harvest, but it's understanding and knowing those seasons. And sometimes it might take a while for you to get in that rhythm. It's not just talking, weeks or months. It might be, years where you finally get into the rhythm of knowing when things are available, when you can harvest them, and how long that harvest season is, because sometimes, it may be a month long where you can harvest things. Other things, it's a week, 2 weeks or so that you can harvest. Knowing what uses the various foods have. How can you use these plants? Which I know that one of the other presenters is going to talk about the various uses, but at this time I only learned 2 uses. One of them was to cook it, and the other was as a medicine. As a child, I had warts, and so did my sister. And so my mom would take us out to find milkweed, and we would break off a leaf, and then the sap would come out, and I had warts on my thumb. And so we would put the milk right on the very top, the head of the wart. And my mom was, really adamant about that, just stick it just on the top, not all around or anything like that. And it wasn't until later I learned, that milkweed is actually poisonous. And so that's why it had the ability, to kill a wart. It has something called cardenolides. I'm not familiar with the word. But, if you're to ingest it, it's the milk, which is a latex fluid, but it could cause you, if say you ingest it raw like that, you can cause you to throw up, have diarrhea, upset stomach, and in large amounts can even, cause you to die. But I just think, so then it made me think about that as an adult, did we build up a tolerance for that poison? Because that's what it actually is, that, say you take it every year at the same time every year, if your body builds up a tolerance for that, so then you don't have, because I've never experienced anything adverse when I ate milkweed, and it just goes back to our traditional ecological knowledge that our tribal people had concerning these foods, and it's not just our native foods. There's a number of other foods that contain poisons, and I actually made a list here. Tomatoes, potatoes, ground cherries, almonds, tea, pepper, mustard, horseradish, and cabbage all contain a form of toxin. So in my understanding is that, when your body ingests, a certain level of toxins, that, it does produce enzymes that metabolize those poisons, and so they have no adverse effects. But I want to continue on with the slide. Social uses and preservation. So here's my grandson on the left, Liam, and my daughter. So we have milkweed growing right out in our front yard. We first saw it pop up, and normally I would pull them up, but we eat these and they're beneficial, so we just let them grow there in our front yard. And I saw that we have some more coming up this spring. It's so important to include your children and grandchildren when you're going out to harvest. My kids, ever since they were little, and even my newest granddaughter, well, she's going to be 3 this year, but I would take her strapped on my back, and we would carry her out, and she was involved with spearing, all the things that we did throughout the year, because that's how our family did it. ever since we were really little, our parents would take us out anytime they were picking, anytime we were out fishing, and included us in these activities. And when my daughter, she's 10 now, but when her and my granddaughter are the same age, which I swear that only happens on reservations, but my daughter and my granddaughter are the same age. And they were 5. And so we went out looking for turnips, and they jumped out of the car, and there was a race to identify who could find, a wild turnip first. And it's exciting to know that in involving them, that they're 5 and they're able to go out, in the pasture and be able to identify these plants for themselves. And so, if you have kids or grandkids, make sure to include them, and they're never too young to learn. Next slide. So this is a few pictures of preparation of milkweed. We make ours fried, and you can see there in the picture in the left that we pick the flour, and we'll have boiling water, and we'll blanch it in the water just for a few minutes, because it does kind of break down fast. So we just kind of blanch it, put it in there for a few minutes. We'll put it in a colander, let the moisture drain off, and then on the picture to the right there, you'll see that we've rolled it in flour. And normally I just use just plain flour, no seasonings. And then we fry it after that. I think that's on the next slide. So there's the picture of it frying, and kind of on medium high heat, and the end product there on the right. So I tell you what's really exciting, like one year, it's had to have been about 12 years ago, one of our neighbors had walked down to our house, and he and his cousins that were visiting from the city, and they're out here playing in the yard, and it was time to pick the milkweeds. And so I said, you boys take these bags and go down the road and go pick some milkweeds for us. And so my youngest son, Paris, he was about 8 at that time. He took them because he was familiar with what they looked like. So he took them down the road, and they picked them all. They came back, and they're just like, geez, our hands are all sticky. And so we washed their hands, and they're like, what are you going to do with these? And I was like, we're going to eat them. So they sat and they watched me. I got them ready and prepared them just like I showed now. And, first they were kind of afraid to eat them because the ones that we did kind of look like spiders. They look like big spiders, but they tried them and they really liked them. And so this neighbor boy, he's an adult now, and so I had him in one of my classes, and his presentation was on milkweed and using it as a textile. And he talked in his presentation about how I had introduced him to this plant when he was a young child, and he ate them and took, went back and told his mom. His mom had never heard of it, and so they began harvesting them and eating them themselves. And so that was really exciting to see, 10, 12 years later, that that one instance of me sharing with him was so impressionable. Okay, next slide. So that gets me into talking about reciprocity and how important it is, to share, but also, in sharing, that when you're a recipient of information that others are sharing with you, as Dakotas, generosity was a very valued virtue. And I think becoming more aware of not our duty, but what it is to reciprocate the things that are given to us and valuing it. There was an elder lady here. Her name was Dorothy Gill. Probably in my middle 30s, whenever we would have council meetings, she would get up and she would always be talking about food and the importance of food, and what is our leadership doing to help teach our kids how to grow gardens. And we wouldn't have as much hardship if we would teach our young people these things. And she worried about that knowledge dying, but also about our young people not being taught these valuable things. So she was always an advocate for food sovereignty, before it even became this national thing that's talked about now. She wanted people to learn. She was free with the sharing of her information. At the college, they recorded her, and this was probably about the late 90s, I would say. They recorded her. She did a lot of talks about how she grew up, what her mother and her grandmother taught her. And so in having a conversation with her later in life, we were talking about medicines, and she said, my mama, she would, her grandma actually would help people in the community. They would come to her for medicines to help themselves, if they were sick or someone in their family was sick, that they would come to her for help. And she said, when they came, they would always bring her a gift. They would always bring her something, a chicken, maybe food, vegetables from their garden, things like that they would always bring her something when they asked for this help. And she said, you don't see that these days. People, they come and they want your help, but they don't bring anything in return. They just take that help and they leave with it. And I didn't really, think deeply on that until, I started to become, more knowledgeable my own self, and I started making salves and soaps and things like that. And, someone had said, it's not right for you to sell those things. You shouldn't be selling our medicines. And, I was really hurt by that. So then I quit altogether. I would make a little bit of salve and soap and stuff to help my family, but it kind of really put in a negative, thought in my mind about what I was doing and why was I doing it. And I thought back on what Kushi Dorothy had said, and I'm like, our currency now is different than it was back then. A chicken back then was currency. Vegetables from a garden, that was currency. And today it translates differently. And in my mind, as I thought back on what she had shared with me and what I was doing, I thought that when we start giving things away and we are not asking in return, it becomes devalued, in the sense that you're not giving anything for what that person is giving you. And that's just my interpretation, and others can, maybe feel differently about that. But I feel that we don't put as much value on our foods as we should, because we can go to the convenience store and foods are so readily available. But, as COVID has taught us, that things can change really fast, where our access to that convenience can be shut down really quick. And there's been an huge increase in the amount of people that are doing gardens, and now there's a thirst for this knowledge. People want to know, where can we harvest these wild foods? How do we eat them? How do we use them? And it's almost like a blessing in disguise, because it's helping this knowledge to continue on, because now we have a want for that knowledge. It's not just, being stored in books somewhere or in a video somewhere. So I just wanted to say that much about Dakota reciprocity, but it's not just Dakota, it's across Indian country that reciprocity is so important to each of us. That's how we kept our tribes going, is by that continual give and take, that circle that went around. Taking care of each other was so very important. So I just wanted to share that much about reciprocity. So did you want me to, Jenna, talk a little bit about the various parts of the plants here?
Yes, that'd be great.
So here on the slide, you see the shoots, which right now, this time of year, is when would be the appropriate time for collecting shoots, is before they started growing any of the buds or the pods on them. And I haven't collected them or ate them myself, but they are described as tasting similar to asparagus, which of course asparagus is ready to be harvested right now. The second picture there is of the buds. And so that is the early stages of the flower. And so I talked about harvesting the flowers and what we ate. And so that's what the flower looks like before it's bloomed, the buds. And the next one is the pods. These are the seed pods. And those you would harvest when they're very firm and young, not after they've been on the plant for a while. And if you're familiar with milkweed at all, those open up and they have a lot of seeds and fluff inside of them, kind of similar to, a dandelion, how when it's spreading its seeds. So you want to get those when they're young and firm. And the last picture there is what the flowers look like after they've bloomed, and they're so beautiful and fragrant when they're in season. And there's an example of some weaving that's been done out of cattail fibers. They are milkweed fibers there on the bottom. Okay, Jenna, if you want to go ahead and talk about this next slide.
Yeah, just a second here. Turn my camera on. Awesome. Hamadakiapi na Matowi Makiapi. Hello, everyone. My name is Jenna Grey Eagle, and I'm the EJ and Stewardship Programs Manager at Wakantipi Waÿaગાpi, and my family comes from Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about harvesting milkweed really quickly. So with the shoots, you always want to wait till they're about 1 to 2 inches off the ground. You want to wait until they have hairy and thick green stems, and get into that a little bit more a bit later. And you want to make sure that they break easily. That's just in case, you don't want them too hard, otherwise they're not going to be very good to eat. And then also you have the buds, so you want those from when they're green to slightly pink. I always think they taste like miniature heads of broccoli. You can always bite into it too, just to see if it's soft enough. And that's the same with the pods as well. You always just want to make sure that they are like tender enough still. And then you want to make sure that they have the pure white interior, because as Ella was talking about, if the seeds are already producing, then it's not good to eat by then. And then you want to make sure that you won't see any spines on it. And if you ever go harvest it, you'll know what I mean. There would be like a really pronounced spine along the side. And then the flowers you can eat, as Ella was talking about. You can also eat them raw in minuscule amounts, or you can fry them up, as Ella was talking about. And yeah, we can go to the next slide. Oh, the next slide, sorry. So yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the nutritional information. I'm so excited to be talking about common milkweed a bit more tonight as a food source and a nutritional source, because unfortunately this plant has such a bad reputation of being poisonous or it's bad for you. But as Ella was talking about, Indigenous people have utilized this plant for thousands of years as a source of food. And so those presumptions about this plant need to start kind of turning around, like start being more recognized that this is actually like a really good food source, and it is edible if you prepare it correctly, and it's really good for you as well. But I want to start with a couple of disclaimers. You will not, first of all, like, you will not find this information online, because it has that reputation of being poisonous, because it's bitter and it contains latex. Linda Black Elk actually shared these lab results with me about the nutritional value of common milkweed, because you can't find this information online, because of that reputation that it has. So her and her students actually sent this to the lab themselves to find out all the nutritional information, and this is what it actually came back with. And another disclaimer really quickly, if you've never tried milkweed, I would say you should try it in very little amounts when you're first starting, because you always want to make sure that you're not going to react badly or have unwanted side effects. So, but if you have tried it, you feel like it sat well with you, and you feel like you can try more, or you want to incorporate it more. The nutritional benefits include fiber, which is really, really great for digestion, omega-3, which is really great for heart health. Then you have fatty acids, which influence cell and tissue metabolism. And then you have vitamin E, which is really great for skin and eye health, amongst many other things. And then you have the carotenoids, which is the same thing that you'll find in like carrots and things like that Ella was talking about. And that has a lot of antioxidant activity and disease prevention. And then another disclaimer, so raw milkweed does contain the cardiac glycosides and other compounds, which is basically what's in the latex that you see. But as Ella was saying, even that can be medicinal, right? Like you can use that on warts, and that can help warts to go away, because that is essentially a poison, as Ella was talking about. But that can be denatured, or it can go away just by cooking. And so you don't have to worry about it too much. I mean, it is something that you don't want to eat raw though, but you can use it on warts, as Ella was talking about. And if you can go to the next slide, please. So a lot of foragers think that the reason that milkweed has the reputation of being poisonous is because people actually have confused it with dogbane. So as you can see in this picture, they do look quite a bit alike. But the way to build confidence, as Ella was talking about with this plant, is just by making sure that you really know dogbane just as well as you know milkweed. And first of all, milkweed should never, ever, ever be bitter when you cook it. If it's bitter, it's most likely dogbane. And So young milkweed leaves, if you're going to use the shoots, actually have really fine hairs. I know you can't see it very well in this picture, but they do have a lot of little hairs. Whereas hemp dogbane is actually nearly hairless. And then milkweed stems are generally thick and green, and the hemp dogbane stems are usually red to purple and a lot thinner in comparison. So just, the more time you spend out in nature, the more time that you spend getting to know this plant, the more that you'll be able to tell the difference. But yeah, just if, milkweed's generally a lot thicker than dogbane. And when you do harvest, you're always going to want to wear gloves as well if you don't want the latex sap on you. That can be washed off, but if you don't want to deal with that, you can also wear gloves. But yeah, as I said, the raw milkweed does contain that cardiac glycosides, or the latex, and that can easily be denatured by cooking. So I wanted to share a couple of recipes here. If you can go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to start with the Forager Chef. Has a really great, very easy recipe to do, which is essentially like cooking asparagus. So if you're familiar with cooking asparagus, then you can become familiar with cooking milkweed shoots. So you always want to pick the young tender milkweed shoots, break them off where they're tender, and then you want to use tons and tons of salt. He even says you want the salt or the water to taste like the sea, essentially. And then you just need water and butter, and then you're essentially good to go. I'll just give people a few more moments to take a picture if they want. We can also share this recipe if anybody likes. You can also find it on Forager Chef website. And really quickly, while people are still looking at this, I just want to say too that I know a lot of people are really concerned about monarch butterflies, because monarchs really utilize common milkweed to lay their eggs. But there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence of folks that go and harvest the shoots, and they actually come back and they find out that the plant actually shoots up even more plants when they come back. And so because the plant compensates itself, and because it's able to survive when you're not cutting the root, harvesting can actually be considered not harmful, especially because monarch butterflies love the leaves more, and nobody really eats the leaves. People usually use the shoots or the buds or the flowers or the pods, as we were talking about. So you can live in reciprocity with the monarchs when you're harvesting milkweed. You just never take more than what you need, as Ella was talking about, and just make sure that you're really living in reciprocity with this plant. And monarchs don't have to be harmed in that way. And then we'll go to the next recipe, please. So this is actually shared by our very own Gabby Menomin, who works with us. She's going to be talking right after me. She makes the best milkweed bud soup recipe I've ever had, so she was kind enough to share the recipe with everyone tonight. So Gabby always likes to, and Gabby, you can talk about this more too if I miss anything, but you generally like to harvest the young tender milkweed buds, and in the picture she was showing what they generally look like when she likes to harvest them. She uses vegetable broth, chopped ham, wild rice, and then salt and pepper. And the big thing is that she always double boils the milkweed buds in water. So when you boil it and you look at the water and it's going to look kind of milky, then you want to strain that and then you boil it again. And if it still looks pretty milky, then you want to go ahead and strain it and boil it again, basically until that milkiness goes away. And then that's whenever you add the rest of the ingredients, and then you're good to go. And then if you can go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to shout out a couple of Native-owned businesses that have waļčaļča, or common milkweed products. So you have Corn Silk Daughter, who is known as Lolly Aguilar. She actually has really beautiful plant earrings and jewelry that contain milkweed. Gabby actually took this picture from Gabby's collection of Lolly's earrings. That's Lolly's earring, and owned by Gabby. I took this picture. And that's actually the milkweed flowers and some of the the leaves on there. Just really beautiful jewelry. And then I just wanted to shout out Ella Robertson's really amazing business called 13 Moons, where she does beadwork and t-shirts and sewing. And please support her because she does really, really amazing work. And I hope you support Lolly as well. She's just really does really incredible work. And so thank you. I think I'm gonna pass it on to Gabby now.
All right, is my video and stuff working? Okay, sweet. So, hello everyone. My name is Gabby Menomin. I come from the Forest County Potawatomi community up in northern Wisconsin. Here at waļčaļča, I am the environmental restoration manager. And I'm super excited to talk with you guys about milkweed today, common milkweed, because this is really, truly, and honestly my favorite plant of all time. I grew up with this plant being in my family, harvesting the milkweed buds. So I grew up with a lot of memories with that, a lot of newer memories with my son as well. Maybe I'll get into some of that. But yeah, so today I will be talking with you guys about the ecological roles and kinship of milkweed, kind of looking into how milkweed kind of lives in and within and around other beings in the natural world. We want to go to the next slide. So the scientific name for milkweed is called Asclepias syriaca. It goes by a lot of different names. I referred to it, and I think most people around me also refer to it as common milkweed. It can also be called other names such as butterfly flower, silkweed, silky swallowwort, and Virginia silkweed. So milkweed is part of the Apocynaceae family, otherwise known as the milkweed or dogbane family. And so some other close relatives that are specifically in the genus Asclepias, at least here that grow here in Minnesota, are plants such as swamp milkweed, butterfly weed, which has that beautiful bright orange flower, green milkweed, showy milkweed, and world milkweed, just to name a few. And some other distant relatives that are also in this dogbane family include things such as the spreading dogbane and periwinkle as well. So milkweed generally likes to grow in areas where it has full sun and access to full sun, but it can handle some slight shade. It does have some shade tolerance. Milkweed generally is pretty great at growing by both seed and rhizomes, although the rhizomatous growth properties that it has kind of can tend to make the plant quote unquote aggressive under certain conditions. So a lot of times you will see milkweed growing in pretty dense monocultures. And then milkweed is also, because of those rhizomatous properties that it has, it's also very, very common to see it regrow very easily after being cut or trampled as well. If we want to go to the next slide. So here I'll just kind of walk through a little bit of identification so you can kind of get yourselves familiar with what milkweed exactly looks like, so that you can kind of have some of these skills and tools to better identify it in the field yourself. So we'll start with the flowers up here in the upper left-hand corner. So the flowers are generally going to be a pale to dark pink color, and they grow in these clusters towards the top of the plant. They almost look, all these little flowers will grow in a cluster, and they're almost ball shaped or spherical shaped when they're full blooming like that. The leaf arrangement is going to be an opposite leaf arrangement. So if you're looking at the stem, the leaves are going to be directly across from each other on the stem. And they're going to kind of, as you can see in this picture maybe you can see it in the upper right-hand photo, upper right-hand side, but they're going to create these 90-degree angles as they alternate and go up the stem like that. The leaves are going to have smooth margins, so they're not going to look like they have teeth on the outside of the leaf. They're going to be a fairly smooth leaf to the touch as well. The top is generally a very dark green color, with the bottom being pale green, almost white at times. I don't have too great a picture of the stem, but if you look at the picture where the sap is coming out, you can kind of see it on the leaf. But the stems of milkweed are going to be slightly hairy. The leaves themselves also have a little bit of a slight fuzz to them as well. And then if we look down at the seed pods down in the lower left-hand side of the screen, you'll see both the seed pods when they're in the process of growing, where they're like a very pale green color with these little spines coming off of the outside, and then you'll see right in the bottom left-hand corner, that is a fully mature seed pod where the seeds are actually bursting out of the seed pod and ready to be wind dispersed. Oh, and I forgot to mention when talking about the flowers, so we have Jenna showed some pictures of kind of the stages of the flower buds as it moves through the flowering cycle, but here you can see another picture of those buds down there. There's some that are in the beginning stages where the flower cluster buds are like very, very small, and then you'll start to see them swell and expand as they get closer to blooming and becoming full-blown flowers. And so I want to talk a little bit about the seeds. So if you haven't seen milkweed seeds, they're very small, almost like scale-like seeds, really flat, brown, and then each seed has its own kind of feathery plume. This is to help with the wind dispersal. So milkweed is their seed dispersal method is with the wind. So it relies on wind to be able to carry the seeds far and wide. So that's a little bit about the seeds. And the milky sap that can be seen on, if you were to break any part of this plant, whether you're picking blooming flowers, the flower buds, leaves, breaking the stem, things like that, you're going to see this really thick white milky sap coming out. And like Jenna had mentioned, the sap does contain latex and the cardiac glycosides in it. Little fun fact, actually. So growing up, my dad always talked about how his grandma had told him about, during World War II, milkweed was actually gathered by the government to create as a latex substitute when they were trying to create different alternatives for rubber when there was rubber shortages and stuff like that. I always just took his word for it, but I actually did fact check him recently, and it is true. Milkweed was harvested and used as a rubber substitute during World War II. It wasn't the greatest rubber substitute, but in their kind of search for a substitute, they also found that the fibers of milkweed are really, really strong and really great and very waterproof as well. I think they use the fibers for some of their parachutes and some other gear as well. So that's just some cool little fun facts that I always heard growing up and finally have looked into, and kind of just seeing how milkweed is such a versatile plant, not only for people, but then we'll get into in the next slide, if we want to go to the next slide, how versatile milkweed is for our insect and other wildlife relatives. So there are over 450 insect species known to feed on milkweed. So there's insects that will feed on basically every single part of the milkweed, from the roots to the flowers, to the leaves, to the stem, to the sap, to the nectar, things like that. So I'll just talk a little bit. I'll go through more of the insect relatives that rely on milkweed and the different parts of the milkweed that feed our insect relatives. So as many of us probably know, milkweed is an excellent source for pollinators. The nectar is really high in nutrients, and so is really sought out by a number of different pollinator and other insects that rely on that nectar. So if you're visiting a milkweed patch in the summer, you'll often see a lot of different insect species on one flower. So you'll see a lot of flies that'll come and visit, beetles, ants, bees, wasps, and butterflies. I did read that hummingbirds will try to visit these milkweed plants, although they're not exactly compatible with the milkweed. So unfortunately, this isn't a great food source for hummingbirds. But for insects, you'll see so many different insects visiting the milkweed. I actually have a funny story about milkweed and some ants. So some people in the office know that I am notorious for wearing sandals. You know, anytime it gets a little bit warm out, I'm wearing my sandals. And so when I go out and forage foods, a lot of times I'm wearing my sandals and stuff. And one summer I was out by myself. I decided to go pick some milkweed, and I noticed there was kind of this big hump in the earth, and I thought I would stand on top of it to get a better look at where some of the milkweed patch was getting really dense, because the milkweed can actually go pretty tall. In my community, it can get up to like my chest or even up to my eyes sometimes, depending on the season and the growing conditions. So I went and I'm standing on this mound of earth, trying to get a better look at the milkweed field. And then all of a sudden I feel a bunch of poking at my feet. And I'm also wearing shorts too. And the poking is like moving up my shins and stuff. And I look down and I'm standing on the biggest anthill I've ever seen. And then I'm looking around at the milkweed that I'm standing next to, and there's a bunch of ants feeding off of the milkweed and the nectar from the milkweed. So be aware, be very vigilant, and wear proper gear when you go visit milkweed, because there's lots of different plant relatives that love to visit this plant as well. And don't be like me and wear sandals and get eaten up by ants. Yeah, where was I? Sorry, I got sidetracked by my own story. But yeah, there's a ton of different insects that like to visit milkweed just for the nectar itself. A lot of different insects will also feed on the sap, leaves, and flowers as well. They provide a lot of different food sources. But you know, out of these over 150 insects that are able to feed off of milkweed to some capacity, they're actually pretty specialized in a way, because when you think of how many different insect species there are in the world, there's this very small percent that can actually digest those toxic compounds that are in milkweed. And so some of those some specific bugs that I labeled, or that I highlighted here in the upper right hand corner, we'll see the red milkweed beetle. At the bottom here, we see the caterpillar and the moth of the milkweed tussock caterpillar. And then on the middle, let's see, the middle right hand side, this is another bug that is commonly found on milkweed. This is, it comes in two sizes. There's a large and a small red and black milkweed bug. They both have different scientific names. I'm sorry, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce those Latin names. And then of course we have the monarch butterfly. And I do want to highlight one of our partners that we've worked with in the past and currently, Monarch Joint Venture. If you want to learn more about specifically how monarch butterflies rely on milkweed, both common milkweed and its relatives, they're an excellent source to learn more detail about how monarchs rely on this amazing plant. I won't go too much into detail on that, because I'd rather leave that to the experts. But something really cool that I kind of found in researching the different insects that rely on milkweed is a lot of them have something called they're referred to as aposematic, which just kind of refers to that red or that orange and black coloration of the insect. And this is essentially just kind of a warning to other predators, whether it's insects or birds or other animals, that that insect is poisonous. And so, like we mentioned, these insects that are able to feed off milkweed are able to digest and intake those toxins. And those toxins are actually used as a form of defense. So they can make these bugs toxic as well, the ones that feed off of milkweed. And so this coloration is the warning to other animals. So I thought that was really cool. It's a new term that I learned while brushing up on my notes of this plant, and something I wanted to share with y'all today. Something else that I read from the U.S. Forest Service is they talked a little bit about the toxicity levels in monarch caterpillars in northern populations versus southern populations. And so they referred to, I believe it was a study that was done where it actually looked at those toxicity levels of monarch caterpillars, and it found that monarch caterpillars that were feeding on common milkweed in northern regions were actually had very low levels of toxic compounds in them. So they could actually probably be edible to birds and such, whereas the southern populations actually did have very large amounts of these toxic compounds in them, and were definitely still toxic. So that's a cool study that I found that the U.S. Forest Service refers to, and something, another cool fact that I wanted to share with you guys tonight. Other animals that rely on that will rely on milkweed include things like a lot of different birds, such as the goldfinch that we see here, as well as chickadees. Other migratory birds rely on the seeds as they're migrating each year. And then there's also smaller mammals such as squirrels that have been known to feed on milkweed as well. And I did see something about deer feeding on milkweed. I assume it's deer feeding on the smaller shoots. But I couldn't find too much information because I know milkweed is generally pretty safe and generally a deer-resistant plant. But there are some sources that say that deer will still eat it. It's probably one of those like kind of last resort type foods, or something they'll eat early in the spring as other plants are emerging. All right, if we want to go to the next slide. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the broader ecological kinship roles that milkweed plays. So you'll see milkweed growing with a number of different species. It grows in a lot of different conditions, such as, in open fields, along roadsides, in ditches, in disturbed areas, along forest edges, things like that. So it's really, there's a lot of different species that it grows with. So I tried to encompass a number of different species, both in kind of wetter habitats. You'll see milkweed growing with Joe Pye weeds, ironweeds, asters, and the wet blazing stars as well. In kind of the drier prairie, kind of borderline of the oak savanna type habitats, you'll see it growing with bee balm, obedient plants, big stem, big blue stem and little blue stem, rattlesnake nesters, goldenrods, mountain mints, and coneflowers as well. So these are some friends that milkweed likes to grow with as well. Another amazing gift that milkweed has is it actually can help improve soil quality as well. So this is a nitrogen fixing plant. And so it can help put nitrogen back into the soil. It also does release a lot of nutrients into the soil when the plant does die and begin to break down, because it has those very thick rhizomatous roots. Those can, when those roots die and break down, they help release more nutrients back into the soil as well, because milkweed is a very high nutrition plant. And milkweed is also an excellent air quality indicator, specifically for ground ozone levels as well. And I'll get into a little bit kind of how you can kind of tell if an area has high or low ground ozone levels. If we want to go to the next slide. So I wanted to go through and talk about some of the threats to milkweed. What are things that can be detrimental to populations, stress out plants, different diseases, things like that. So I'll start with climate change. So milkweed is expected to be impacted by climate change in two major ways. The One of them being the kind of shifts that we're seeing here in the Midwest with both drought and flood frequencies. So milkweed can be stressed out by prolonged periods of drought. Here in the Midwest, we are expected to see, as climate change progresses, we are expected to see longer and more frequent drought periods. This can be very stressful to milkweeds, even though they are pretty tolerant of dry sites. Any plant, when exposed to long and prolonged periods of drought, can get stressed out. Another big one is flooding. So milkweed can tolerate some level of saturated soils, but once if an area begins to flood, milkweed really doesn't have any of the properties to handle prolonged periods of flooding. They're pretty susceptible to root rot when they're exposed to too moist a soil for too long. And then another huge aspect of climate change is this shifting of seasons that we've been seeing. So here in the Midwest, it's predicted that we're going to be having shorter, warmer winters and longer growing seasons. And so this shifting of seasons and the time periods of those seasons can actually almost confuse milkweed. It can cause it to go into dormancy early, or it will have a hard time breaking out of its dormancy. And this can actually be really detrimental to monarchs who are trying to find milkweed to lay their eggs on. If the milkweed is confused about when it's supposed to be growing, it may not be available when the monarch butterflies come through and look for places to lay their eggs. Another threat to milkweed is stress from insects. So here I have a picture of a bunch of aphids that are feasting off of this isn't specifically common milkweed, but this is a milkweed relative, I believe. And so aphids can be kind of notorious with milkweeds for if they're in these really big dense populations like this, they can actually almost suck the milkweed dry, which can cause a lot of stress and mortality for milkweed plants. But then we also have, I mentioned them in one of the previous slides, but both the large and the small red and black milkweed buds can cause a lot of mortality to the seed crop. Up to 80 to 90% of a milkweed seed crop can actually be lost due to these insects if the populations get too high. And then I'll talk a little bit about the ozone pollution. So this is kind of where you try to get into milkweed being a good indicator for ground ozone levels. If you're in an area that doesn't have high ground ozone levels, you'll see a very healthy milkweed. Once you see those ozone levels start to increase, you'll start seeing these really black dots, or these really tiny black dots called stipples developing on leaves, and this can stress a plant out enough to kill it eventually. Another disease that milkweed can get is something called milkweed yellows. This is a bacterial infection that kind of goes through different stages. It starts off with the yellowing of leaves, and then you see kind of witch's broom and kind of twisting of the leaves, and then you'll get into more high stress and mortality of the milkweed as well. And then also another threat to milkweed is the stigma, of it being considered a noxious or nuisance or aggressive weed. When a plant has a stigma surrounding it, it can cause a lot of harm for people not wanting to include it, wanting to try to get it off the landscape. It's a really big issue in the agricultural world of farmers wanting to get milkweed off of their property, especially if they have cattle or other livestock that they don't want to ingest this plant. If we want to move to the next slide. And I just want to talk a little bit really quick about, growing your own milkweed. So the best method would be to get a section of the rhizome and grow the milkweed from rhizome. So basically all you want to do from that is find that rhizome root that runs laterally right under the soil surface. And you want to find a section that has a bud on it. So this picture up here is really great. it actually shows those the buds on the root, and that's what you want to plant in the ground. And then you can also grow it pretty easily from seed. It takes about 2 years for the plant to grow or bloom if you're planting it from seed, only about a year if you're doing from the root. So I just wanted to share that super quick, and I realize we are running really short on time, so I'll end it right here.
Oh my gosh, that was really funny. I couldn't figure out my my mute after how many years of doing Zoom. Okay, well, like Gabby said, that was we're running a little short on time, but not really. I felt like that was so lovely. You know, one of my favorite parts of our Gifts of the Plant Nation webinar is being able to talk about our plant relatives and all of the ways in which they're important in our lives and the lives of all of our animal and insect relatives. But I think one of my favorite things that I love and adore about this webinar especially is that it started from when we were all working at waļčaļča. And you know, for us as Dakota people, we have a tree, a cottonwood tree that's really important to us. But when working in an urban area at a Dakota sacred site and having to work with a lot of different governing agencies and the city and other conservation nonprofits, we realized that a lot of the people that we were working with, they didn't have that same connection to the different trees and plants in the ways that we do, at least. For us, cottonwood trees, they connect us to the waļčaļča, the Star Nation, to our eagle relatives, and are really important in a lot of our ceremonies. But a lot of the folks that we were working with, they looked at cottonwoods as kind of like a nuisance tree, and they didn't understand the importance of it. And so that kind of is what got us started in doing these webinars, especially with where waļčaļča is, talking about our plant relatives, sharing these stories, and sharing their gifts is really important to dispelling a lot of that, like that fear, right? So when we think about milkweed, there's a lot of fear. I remember one time going out and harvesting milkweed and getting stopped by a non-native person who was like, you know, those are really toxic, right? And it's happened a few times, but how wonderful is it that we come from a community that for hundreds and thousands of years have had relationship with these plants in our homelands, and that we have these amazing stories and recipes and acts of being in community with each other and with the plants and living in that reciprocity. And these webinars are a really wonderful way to talk about those things and bring us all together. So I just want to say waļčaļča to all of our presenters, and now we'll kind of get into some of the questions from our Q&A. So we have one question that is asking if the slideshow will be available, and I believe waļčaļča will be having a recording on the waļčaļča YouTube channel. So the slideshow will be available there along with the recording. We have another question. Can you pickle the shoots of the milkweed like you can with asparagus? Ella or Gabby or Jenna, do you know the answer to that question?
Yes, you can. I've seen people try it before. I've never tried it personally, but I imagine it'd be a lot like pickling asparagus. You can always try it and let us know what you think of the taste.
Okay, another question we have is, do milkweed flowers have any medicinal value?
The one that I shared was just using the milk on warts, but you know, on further research, there's a few different medicinal uses, but none that I am familiar with. And I guess it's just, you know, experimenting, which that's usually what I do when I'm finding out new uses, is, you know, trying it on myself to see if it works, and I am still alive. So.
Okay. Are there other? Oh, sorry. Are other milkweeds edible? For example, common milkweed, but is butterfly milkweed also edible?
I can hop in and answer that. So there are other milkweeds that are edible. Butterfly milkweed, I don't think it has as many food properties, but it is a lot of the milkweed relatives do have a lot of different and sometimes similar medicinal properties as well. Yeah, that's what I know. And then one thing I did want to mention that I forgot to talk about was just how, like, talking about how versatile milkweed is. It's really crazy because I grew up learning that, you know, you can, my family always gathered the milkweed buds. When I met my partner, my mother-in-law talked about how growing up in Oglala, she grew up eating the new leaves on the plants, and then hearing Ella talk about harvesting the flowers and eating the flowers. So I just wanted to bring that up about how just amazing and versatile eating you can the food properties of milkweed are. But I do believe there are some species that you can still eat, but I know more medicinal properties among the different species rather than food properties.
Yeah, I would just add that you're right. I think it's like different things for different communities. I haven't ever heard of butterfly milkweed. I'm sure maybe somebody's tried it, but I think showy milkweed is probably most similar to common milkweed in how it's used, in the sense that you can eat the blossoms, you can eat the shoots in a very similar way, and that you can use yeah, essentially in the same way as common milkweed. The other milkweeds I know were more used like for medicines and stuff, but that's what I know.
Awesome. We have another question that is asking, is there anything you can do about the yellowing? It seems to be spreading where they're from.
Yeah, so there's a couple different management things that you can do with the yellowing, and it's mainly just either pulling infected plants or removing leaves that seem to be infected or whole parts of the plant that are infected. That seems to be the only method that both works and is fairly easy to do. I saw when I was doing research on milkweed yellows, I was looking at different people's results for doing this kind of removal of infected plants and infected parts process, and it seems to clear up after or by the next year. The main thing is the milkweed yellows is it is spread by insects, most commonly leafhopper bugs. And so basically you just want to get those infected plants and infected parts of the plants out of the population you're working with so that those insects can't continue to ingest that bacteria and then reinfect healthy plants. So removal is the best and most effective option.
Lovely. Thank you all so much for answering those questions and for being with us this evening. I think we're going to put an end of event survey in the chat. It would mean the world to us if you could please fill that out so we can see if we're doing a good job, and also help us continue to do more programming like this. Thank you all for tuning in, and help us give a warm thank you to all of our presenters, Ella, Jenna, and Gabby, being with us here tonight and sharing all of their knowledge with us so that we can be good relatives to each other and to the land and to the plants and the animals. And with that, I think we'll close out for the evening. Waļčaļča.